Hello, I want to talk about the Atron today. This is a ship that I've been flying for a very long time, and it's one that I'm very comfortable with. It's a ship that I think is pretty good for low-sec frigate dueling, but it's also very dependent on good target selection. Against the right target, you can win easily with very minimal effort on your part, but against the wrong target, you tend to lose in spectacular fashion. So it's a pretty simple ship to fly, just in terms of mechanical execution in the fight. And I think it's a very newbie-friendly ship, provided that you pick your targets carefully. The only problem for new players is that the fitting on this ship is extremely tight in terms of both CPU and in power grid. It requires Advanced Weapon Upgrades 5 and Hybrid Weapon Rigging 4 in order to fit, and I really believe that you can't afford to compromise on any aspect of it. So if you don't have these skills, you can make up for it using implants. So I'll just talk very briefly about the implants that I use. This character actually doesn't have Advanced Weapon Upgrades 5, so in order to make up for that, I use a 3% power grid implant here in slot 6. This allows me to fit this ship. For the rest of the implant set, I use a set of +4 learning implants here, slots 1 through 4. And to fill out the rest of the slots, I use a set of 3% hard wirings, and I use Azor's Hyperlink, which is a speed implant. An implant set like this one will only cost about 210 million ISK. The most expensive implant here is Azor's, which costs 50 million. The rest of the implants cost roughly 20 million ISK apiece. And it's a very good general purpose, just all-around clone that kind of just helps a little bit no matter what kind of ship you're flying. I like to fly a very wide variety of ships, so I like to have a good, just all-around clone that I use pretty much all the time. On my other PvP character, Annika, I actually do have Advanced Weapon Upgrades 5 trained, so instead of the power grid implant, I use a 3% navigation implant, but otherwise the clone is the same. And I think as long as you stay in low sec, I really strongly recommend that you get an implant set like this one, because they give you an edge in any kind of fight you take, no matter what kind of ship you're flying, and the risk of getting potted in low sec is very small. So I'll write the fit in the video description. I'll just mouse over each of the mods just so you can see what they are. So this is really a point range kiting ship. The goal is to keep range just outside of heated web range. I think of it as a counter to Afterburner brawling and Afterburner scram kiting ships that you find very commonly in low sec. So both the DPS and the tank of this ship are both pretty bad. It really relies on its ability to kite outside of your opponent's range and not get hit in order to win. Its real strength is that it's faster than almost all other Afterburner ships. And also the fall-off bonus in the hull gives it pretty good projection out to 15 kilometers with 150 railguns. So 15 kilometers is outside of blaster range, it's outside of autocannon, rocket, and unbonus pulse laser range. So any ship with those weapons are your targets. If the target is faster than you, or if it has good projection and good DPS out to 15 kilometers, then you're probably going to lose. So a ship like a Slicer, for example, is something that you should never ever fight with this Atron. You also have to avoid fighting almost anything that has a micro warp drive fit, because a micro warp drive brawler is going to be much faster than you, so they can usually beat you just by using approach F1. And a micro warp drive kiter can always just run away if they're losing. So I would never ever use this ship in nullsec, because pretty much everybody there fits a micro warp drive. And it might sound like from my description that it has a very limited engagement profile, but the reality is in the current low sec meta, a lot of people fit afterburners only, and you can usually win. You can very often win against a lot of targets that you find. I took a gate into a Tormentor and a Plex here, and kind of as you'd expect, I get immediately tackled at 0 on the beacon. But the advantage of fitting a Afterburner onto a kiting ship like this is that you can do this and still pull range even if you get scrammed at 0. You want to do this as quickly as possible to get out of his optimal range. So here I had both my Afterburner and my web preheated. The highest optimal range a Tormentor will have is usually around 11 kilometers. So once you're outside of heated web range, you're usually pretty safe. Once you get to this range, you always want to preheat your web and watch the range from your target very carefully. If at any point they get within 13 kilometers, like if they try to slingshot you, like the Tormentor's doing here, then you immediately want to web them, and that allows you to pull away again. In a matchup like this, that's really all you need to do. A ship like a dual rep Incursus, for example, is something that has no chance of beating you because they're slow and they don't have any kind of projection and they don't even have a web, so they have no chance of catching you. But they can tank you until they run out of cap boosters, so you have to be prepared for the fight to last a very long time. And this is the kind of situation I actually run into pretty often. So you really always want to make sure you're carrying lots of ammo because the DPS of the Atron is so low. If you're really cheap, you could just carry a big stack of non-faction T1 antimatter. It really doesn't matter in a situation like this. You just want to make sure you don't run out of ammo. But here I think this fight lasted almost 5 minutes, but it's just a matter of time. So these fights are going to start looking the same here, but that's kind of the nature of flying a somewhat one-dimensional kiting ship like this. A breacher doesn't have a range bonus, so a rocket breacher can't hit beyond 10 kilometers with faction rockets. And it's slower than an Atron, so it's almost a perfect target. A hookbill can actually be pretty dangerous because they're very often either fit with double webs or they're fit with dual prop. Neither one of those fits are one that you can beat. But I'd actually looked up this guy's kill board ahead of time and I was fairly confident that he'd be Afterburner fit with only one web. And that kind of matchup is actually very favorable for the Atron. For that reason, kill boards are a very, very powerful resource to check. Because most conventional hookbill fights I can never fight, but this one is actually very easy to beat. The hookbill also gets a range bonus, so he could potentially have switched to javelin rockets to hit me at this range, but in my experience most people don't carry javelin rockets. Even destroyers like autocannon thrasher, for example, is something that you can usually beat. He's actually using 200 autocannons with barrage loaded, but my ideal range is well into his fall-off range. Although barrage is pretty dangerous at the edge of scram range to a scram kiter, you can see that at this range he's really just barely scratching my shields. Although a fight against autocannon thrasher is often winnable, artillery thrasher is something that does more damage than you at your optimal range, so it's not something that you can beat. So I'm waiting inside this Plex for a Thrasher, and I don't know how he's fit. But I have enough experience in this kind of matchup to know that he could potentially be artillery fit, and that if he is, it's not something that I can win. So I'm kind of mentally prepared for the possibility ahead of time, which is fortunate. So you can see when he comes in, his Alpha Strike just immediately takes me to half armor, which lets me know immediately that he's artillery fit, so it's time to get out. So I reacted pretty quickly and just aligned to a Celestial, and as soon as I got out of point range, I just warped out. You can see if I hadn't done that, he probably would have killed me in his third or fourth shot. The other kind of matchup you want to avoid is one against micro warp drive brawling ships, like this Atron here, for example. Because you have no range control whatsoever, because they can just burn straight towards you through your web. So I was thinking here that I'd, because I have an agility advantage in with my Afterburner, that I'd just kind of manually pilot in the direction that he came from, which would hopefully create some separation from him as he was turning around. Even if that would have worked, I think I reacted too late for it to matter, and to be honest, I only win this fight because he turned his micro warp drive off. Otherwise I would have lost badly. So one way you can be very effective in solo PvP with relatively low skill points is by flying a ship like this that's a counter to certain fits, and by learning to pick your targets well. You are kind of playing a rock, paper, scissors game by flying a ship like this, and I understand that some people might think that this would be pretty boring, especially more experienced players. I used to fly this ship a lot, but I don't fly it nearly as often as I used to. This fit really only works well in low-sec 1 versus 1s. It takes advantage of Plex mechanics, and outside of that type of scenario, it's not really a fit that I would use for anything. I would certainly never use it in nullsec, where the majority of people fit micro warp drives. With that said, the ship is very effective in low-sec. He has no real problem finding a good target, because afterburners are just so common in low-sec. And I checked my killboard stats recently, and the Atron is the hull that I have the second most kills with. And most of the time I was using this exact fit, so I hope that says something to its effectiveness in low sec. So thanks for watching.